This is the Humans of Gaming podcast, an open and honest conversation about games, life, and belief.
Hey, this is Drew Dixon from Love Thy Nerd. I am the Chief Content Nerd at Love Thy Nerd, and I'm joined with Chris Gwaltney. I'm joined by Chris Gwaltney. Hey, Chris.
You're killing it, man.
Thanks,
it's been
man.
a while, so
worked really hard on it.
Yeah, I'm Chris.
I practiced that intro in the mirror actually, several times.
I believe it. I am a Chief Executive Nerd for Love Thy Nerd, and this is Humans of Gaming, where we talk to the many, many people in the games industry that do what we love. They help make the things we love. We just want to get to know them as people. So thanks for being here. Yeah. This is actually going to be part 2 of a conversation we had with Yannic. And
Yannic Lejac.
Yeah.
Which is a sweet last name.
It is a sweet last name.
Way cooler than Dixon.
Not as cool as Gwaltney, though.
Is Gwaltney cool? That's all right. There's like a bacon brand, isn't there, called Gwaltney or something
There
like
is,
that?
And I get no money from it. Or bacon, for that matter.
No, that's a bummer.
So yeah, this is part 2. It was a long conversation, but it was a good one, man. There was just a lot of meat in there, and hope you guys enjoyed the first part. And we get into a lot more territory in the second part. And,
so this part you're going to hear about Yannic's experiences at Blizzard, how he's a full-time writer there, and kind of you get a little bit of a peek into what it would be like to work for one of the nation's world's largest game studios.
Oh yeah.
And Blizzard's unique too in that it's a publisher and a developer, so they kind of wear both those hats, which is
do everything in-house.
Kind of rare these days. It's weird and hard and fun to work at a place like that. And so if you're interested in, putting your hat into the ring to work for a big studio like that, this will give you some insight on what it's like and
for sure.
that experience. The good, the bad, the ugly. I think you'll really enjoy it.
Yeah. Well, hope you guys enjoy the conversation with Yannic as it continues and wraps up on Humans of Gaming. So thanks for being here.
I do want to hear, before we run out of time, I want to respect your time. I know today we're actually recording on New Year's Day, so definitely want to respect.
Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year, everyone.
This is, I'm happy to talk. I can talk for a while, honestly. I'm kind of grateful for the company right now because I've been sort of alone for the past few days.
Yeah.
It's been you've had a rough go of it lately. But yeah, so how did you, or maybe walk us through how you transitioned to working, because you were a writer for Blizzard for a while, and how kind of all that came about.
Yeah, so similar to what I guess I was saying about Tom Bissell or something, was I did something.
You felt like that was your
similar,
trajectory,
but kind of
to
sorry, what?
Did you feel like that was sort of your the trajectory, as it were? Like if you don't want to do games writing forever because it's pretty freaking demanding.
Yeah.
Then land a job as a writer for a major studio.
Mm-hmm.
Game studio.
Yeah. And there's different ways to do that and different places to do that. And I think I say something that it was similar to Tom Bissell in that I think I had started at Kotaku during that email that I quoted before. Was Steven and the rest of the kind of leadership at Kotaku had kind of been trying very actively to sort of pivot our coverage to this way where we were more focused on kind of games that were currently popular rather than games that were being kind of hyped, or the anticipation was kind of building for them. So one of the things I think big and very important realizations that he made at that time was that, um, and I think actually Destiny of all things was what contributed to this, because when Destiny came out, a bunch of people at Kotaku really kind of latched onto it and really liked it. But obviously, Destiny's always been a very kind of controversial and problematic game as
Yeah.
well. So they were criticizing it a lot as well. And that just like that was doing really well for the site on a number of different levels. Like the articles were good, the content was good, and it was getting tons of traffic. So I think the combination of that and this kind of like present focused coverage that he wanted to see was that we just had a couple conversations as a team where he was like, "Hey, what are some other games like Destiny that we can write about at that level where it's like we're doing a lot of very sustained and regular coverage of it?" And someone said League of Legends, because League of Legends is obviously like one of the most popular games in the world, and nobody volunteered for it because nobody wanted to take it on.
Nobody wanted to endure the toxicity of League of Legends to write about it.
So I like was the one that raised my hand because I was just like, this seems like interesting, and God,
I hate myself just enough. I'll volunteer for this. I'm right in that sweet spot.
Right. So I think like I started that, and I think I don't know. I try to be sympathetic or supportive of myself in some ways today, because I definitely did a lot of stupid stuff in the course of trying to write about League of Legends like so regularly and so assiduously. But it was also like, I don't like seeing where games coverage kind of went after that. Like I think it did genuinely have some positive influence on the ways that like online games were covered. But one of the things that more kind of focused on me personally, one of the things that happened with that was Blizzard contacted me at a certain point after I'd been like, I kind of had this reputation online and certainly in the industry of like, oh, Yannic's the guy who just writes all the time about League of Legends now. So Blizzard was trying at that point to promote and release Heroes of the Storm, which was its kind of like competing title to League of Legends. And I checked it out because I was curious about it, and I really loved I call it HOTS. Blizzard itself doesn't really like that acronym, but I think it's the best and most self-evident one. So I really loved HOTS, and I think part of what I liked about it in retrospect too was that it was very explicitly designed in a number of ways to try to be more kind of casual and newcomer friendly and accessible than League of Legends. And I was still trying, like, part of the struggle of my League of Legends coverage was I was trying to kind of write about this game at a fairly high level while also struggling to just like, you know, master it, or not even master it, but understand it on a clear way myself as a player. And like the climb in League of Legends just to get to level 30, which is when you can start playing ranked games, is like so long and it's so brutal. And I remember my girlfriend at the time, who's she was a games journalist as well. Now she's a game narrative designer. She was really into MOBAs, and she loved Dota 2, which is Dota 2 is the like even more complex and difficult one than League of Legends. And she compared it in this way I found really interesting to kind of like entering into a fraternity or being like, you know, drafted and brought into like, you know, the way you see in movies like Full Metal Jacket, like the kind of like whole like recruitment process of joining the military, where it's like
so accurate.
You literally have your
Just
kind of like soul and your life and your
cussing at
identity
you.
just like broken down by this game and how brutal and toxic and abusive people are in it as you're learning to play it. So then by the time you kind of like emerge victorious from that awful, painful process as like a person who's like, okay, now I'm a Dota player, you've had to, by design, you've had to develop such a thick skin of like, so like all the toxicity and abuse just kind of bounces off of you because that's the only way you could survive it that long, you know? But so I was playing League a lot, and then I think I kind of quickly picked up on HOTS as an alternative, and I started writing about that a lot. And that in retrospect, like if I'd wanted to continue working as a games journalist, that probably wasn't the best idea because HOTS was never like it never took off the way Blizzard clearly wanted
Right.
it to, and it
Yeah.
never kind of.
And they eventually abandoned it, basically, right?
Well, it's still alive, but yeah, they like for a while it had like a very large development team because MOBAs themselves they're very like dense and complicated games, so you need a lot of people to work on them. Like the reason why Riot struggled for so long to ever release another game is that like you kind of need a gigantic company at the size and scale of Riot just to be able to support something like League in the first place to kind of pump out content at the pace that you need to monetize the game and then also to like just constantly be rebalancing heroes and the kind of way that the whole competitive system works. So
yeah, just the esports stuff alone.
Yeah. So that then like when I ended up getting let go. I'll just say fired. I don't know why let go always feels like a weird
Feels better.
euphemism to me. But like Gawker Media at the time that this was all happening was going through its kind of final throes with the Hulk Hogan lawsuit that it was being sued by Hulk Hogan in that famous case. Because Gawker proper had posted that video of him having sex with his friend's wife. And yeah, it's weird thinking of how my career was influenced by Hulk Hogan in some bizarre ways.
Thanks a lot, Hulk.
But so I was let go because the company was just like literally hemorrhaging money after a certain point, and they were just kind of like, there was just like a lot of kind of tensions as a result of that. And then when that happened, Blizzard kind of immediately like approached me and asked me if I wanted to come work for them, which I'd been so like I was just so kind of exhausted and burnt out, both from the pressures that I was telling you about before in terms of just like the insane time commitment of video game journalism. And then also that kind of layered on top of how crazy an environment Gawker was at that time because it was going through such a like kind of profound sort of shift and I mean it was basically kind of like dissolving in front of our eyes in certain ways. Like it was running out of money and going bankrupt like in real time. And that obviously
That's
like
wild.
just made it a very tense place to work.
I just looked this up. It was a $31 million settlement. So for a media company that's
right, and the whole thing
big, but yeah, there's not that kind of money in like the type of coverage and things that sites that Gawker ran.
Right, because it was like Gawker was profitable, and I think like maybe they would have even been able to survive it if it had happened somewhere else. But I remember one of the specific challenges was that the place where the lawsuit was filed and then like where it was ultimately decided was in or around Hulk Hogan's kind of hometown. And I remember one of the kind of specific technicalities of that was that when you lose a lawsuit case like that in that legal ecosystem, you're kind of you have to pay the entire settlement up front. You can't like pay it in installments or anything. And looking back at that case and the way that Peter Thiel was obviously kind of masterminding it to destroy Gawker, like that was obviously an attempt because he knew that like if you put Gawker, if you give them this $30 million bill up front that they just have to pay all at once, like that was going to dissolve the company basically. So anyways, that was all happening, and once I was let go, I think I was just at a point where I was like kind of wanting to try something new. So then Blizzard, when I got this invitation from Blizzard, it was both exciting because like I really loved HOTS and I still love HOTS. And like this idea of being able to kind of contribute to something that I was really enthusiastic about at the time, that was exciting. But then Blizzard also
what was the position for?
Well, that's like the thing is I was a writer. I was hired as a writer, and I think one of my errors was I didn't really think about this clearly enough in advance of like what that would be like at a company as big as Blizzard, because like I just sort of came in, and I remember when I did my interviews there, I was really excited and throwing all these ideas out to them, and all the people I was interviewing with sounded really like excited too. And then once I got there, I realized like, oh, like this is this huge complicated company with all this internal bureaucracy and stuff, and like even if you have a really exciting idea, like it is a really arduous and kind of time consuming process just to even like
To get
build
it
the
off the ground.
coalitions you need internally to get it approved or anything. So I was a writer on this team called editorial. And I'm trying to think of how to say this. One of the things that's weird about like Blizzard is a very, or at least it was, I don't know what it's like now because it was obviously restructured a lot after the layoffs in 2019, which I was part of. But it's a very like idiosyncratic company in a lot of ways because it's both a publisher and a developer, which a lot of other, if you think of other kind of companies at its level like EA or Ubisoft, um like a lot of those companies are more just like EA, for instance, is much more a publisher that owns all these
Yeah.
independent studios, whereas like Blizzard has always kind of like handled both by itself. And then like that changed a little bit, and it's changing more and more with the acquisition by Activision. But for a while at least, it was kind of like, especially when Mike Morhaime and all the kind of original founders were still in charge of everything, it was very much kind of like left to do its own thing in a lot of ways. And I think when it came to something like writing, that led to some kind of awkwardness on a structural level because like the company was so big, and I think it hadn't really done a lot of work or enough work to kind of account for how big it had become post like when World of Warcraft came out. That was kind of like the first game of that size or that scale, right? Like, and I think
Oh
it's a
yeah.
really historically significant title in the history of the game industry because it kind of rocketed Blizzard to this new echelon of wealth and power that like nobody could have really imagined prior to that point. And that's when Blizzard, Drew, you came and visited me at the campus. That's when Blizzard moved out of like some dingy little office and established itself as like it has this full like massive sprawling campus in Orange
Yeah,
County,
it's a crazy
California.
place.
Yeah.
You gave us the official unofficial tour. It was awesome.
And I think the thing that I didn't even realize, and this is a thing that like I think a lot of games journalists actually do a pretty bad job of, because there's been this narrative for a long time of like seeing WoW as this game that's kind of slowly dying or decaying. And that may be true in a grand scheme of things, but like I think what people don't realize that like one made WoW so successful in the first place and then continues to make it successful to this way that like it's basically been the kind of backbone of Blizzard in a financial sense for a
Yeah.
very long time now, is because like so many other companies like League of Legends, for instance, Riot with League of Legends, like they had to kind of find these new business models to monetize themselves. And a lot of those were kind of built to avoid charging people a monthly subscription price. But like a monthly subscription price is obviously one of the most clear and easy ways
Yeah, it's
you can
consistent. You can count
support
on it.
yourself as an online business.
Mhm.
So when you think of WoW at its peak, it was like what, like 12 million players who are all paying, 15, $20 a month or something like that. Like it was incredibly lucrative. And I think the company like already had all of these established franchises like Diablo and StarCraft prior to that. And then when it kind of like boomed in this new way, I think it just kind of like I think it just kind of kept like adding new people and new resources and hiring new teams and stuff just because like it had the money to do that basically. The
You feel
awkwardness,
like it kind of got just bloated?
I don't I don't know if bloated is the right word. And I want to be clear that I can't really speak to how that impacts it as a developer, because I was never in one of the development teams proper. But
Mhm.
for writing purposes, it led to this very weird thing where there was like several different teams of writers in completely different parts of the company that were like ultimately kind of like it led to this weird kind of like jurisdictional and like kind of like rivalry almost in certain ways where it's like we were all trying to kind of work on the same thing
Yeah.
simultaneously, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
And then it was like, so like I worked and like in this team called the editorial, I think its full name was like Global Publishing Editorial, and that was officially part of the publishing depart or you wouldn't call it the department, but that kind of like wing of the company essentially. And then
Mhm.
I met a couple other writers in who worked in a completely different part of the company that was referred internally. It was always called the tech org, and they worked as kind of very similar types of things as like a kind of mixture of copywriting and narrative writing, where they worked, but they were classified completely differently because they technically were employed through the kind of like I think it was called web and mobile. Like they worked officially on like the websites and BattleNet as like this kind of standalone app and client that the company has.
Mhm.
Um, and that was just really weird because oh, and then on top of that, the other thing I should add with that is that Blizzard, I think Blizzard historically has not been one of the companies that has made a ton of dedicated, like it doesn't dedicate a bunch of like fully invested resources strictly in narrative design. A lot of the time when you have positions like narrative design, they're more something like quest designers, which means they're kind of doing more of the kind of technical nitty gritty stuff of like implementing this stuff in the game itself rather than just kind of like sitting and dreaming up stories and writing dialogue and then punching the dialogue into a spreadsheet or something like that. Um, and that's like how WoW and like Diablo and a lot of the different departments have always worked essentially. They have other parts which are have dedicated writers, but a lot of that, as far as I know, is both handled kind of contractually. Like you have like these kind of novelists who like the same sort of people who write like Warhammer novels and stuff like that. They would write the kind of like extended universe StarCraft novels and Diablo novels, which
Yeah.
Mhm.
God, those games have like so much lore that
Yeah.
I remember at one point I
Yeah.
applied for this job internally because like you get to see these jobs pop up internally before they're posted publicly, and it sounded
Mhm.
so cool. It was a job as a historian because they have a history department at Blizzard,
That's
and
incredible.
Wow.
a lot of big companies like BioWare and other companies that deal with a lot of really complicated lore have those kind of positions too, where you're basically just like trying to make sure that everything is internally consistent.
Yeah.
Um,
That's
Oh man.
wild, man.
and I
That's
quickly
like a dream
realized,
job for so many
yeah,
people.
I quickly realized when I applied for that I was like, I would have needed to be playing WoW from like day one, and I would have needed to
Mm,
like
Yeah.
spent years of my life learning about all of this to be at the level
There's
of like,
someone way more nerdy than you that's gonna get
dude,
that job.
just that Warcraft lore alone, that's like,
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
because it doesn't work. I honestly, that was one of the things that I was always a little bit out of place at Blizzard just because I was not a WoW. I've never been a WoW person. I was
yeah.
honestly kind of. I remember as a kid, I was kind of mad at Blizzard for making WoW because I loved the Warcraft RTS, especially Warcraft 3.
Yeah. Those
Um,
were great games.
yeah, like I
Yep.
loved that game so much. So I was mad that I was like, why aren't you just making more Warcraft RTS games? But
Mm-hmm.
doesn't WoW have like, I mean, it has like alternate timelines and like different dimensions and stuff like that too at this
Sure.
point. So
Oh,
Probably.
yeah. I mean,
it's like
it's,
comic book
yeah.
lore. Like you just
Yeah.
Oh,
like
dude. Yeah.
Oh
there's like
yeah.
5 different versions of Thrall or something like that, and you like have to make sure you know which one you're actually writing for.
Yeah, I
Um
bet.
anyway, so that's all to say like I think there was kind of this cultural expectation, and I think it's kind of a crappy one, and it was one that I was holding myself to in a way that I shouldn't have when I left games journalism, which is I think like I think there was this big kind of pressure that I felt certainly, and I heard from a lot of other people, both at Kotaku specifically, and then just in games journalism more broadly, of like, there was ways that you could switch into working in the game industry that were considered kind of like, not noble or anything, but at least like cool or like respectable. And like you've seen a lot of journalists like Tom Bissell do that, where it's like if you switch from being a game critic to then writing as a full-time narrative designer, I think people tend to look at that as kind of more of a higher calling than if you go into working in publishing, be it marketing or PR or community management. I certainly felt like I was getting this kind of message from people that like that is selling out essentially. It's like, oh, you're going from criticizing games and you're going from speaking about them honestly to then like being a shill for this big corporation.
Yeah, you're working for the man.
Yeah. And
I can see that. I don't think that's fair, but I can see that.
I think that there is a lot of truth to that. And I think that was, honestly, looking back, I think part of what just didn't really work for me about working at Blizzard, because I'll be totally honest, like I wasn't very happy there. And I knew that, and I'd recognized that, and I was making plans to leave well before the layoffs happened. Because like I don't think that's who I really am as a person. Like I don't like writing the kind of like very like hype focused kind of promotional content. And I thought for a while I would be okay with that, especially with a game like Heroes, because I was like, well, I love this game's aesthetic. I love its design. I love the way it plays. You know, like I just love it in all these ways. So like, why would it be a problem to just like write all this kind of stuff talking about how awesome it is every day? And for a while it was that, but I don't think that's like how I work as a person. Like I'm kind of, I'm more sort of cynical than that. And I tend to kind of find problems in things, which is in some ways probably why, went back to school and I'm now pursuing the work I'm doing now, because, like being a social worker, the whole thing that they say as the kind of top level tagline on all the MSW Masters of Social Work programs is like, social workers work on addressing social problems. So it's like, okay, like I'm more interested in identifying and describing problems than I am just talking about how great something is, if that makes sense.
What up, nerd? Thank you for listening to this podcast from the Love Thy Nerd Podcast Network. We hope you're enjoying it. But hey, did you know that Love Thy Nerd airs almost all of its podcasts first on LTN Radio? That's right. LTN Radio is your home for the best Christian rock, rap, pop, and indie music. And it's also the place to go to hear Love Thy Nerd's content before it reaches the podcast feed. In addition to that, Love Thy Nerd creates a lot of content that's exclusive to LTN Radio that you're missing out on. So go check out ltnonair.com and listen for yourself. You can also download the Live 365 app on your smartphone and search and favorite LTN Radio, or enable the LTN Radio skill on your Echo devices and simply ask Alexa to play Love Thy Nerd. Now let's get you back to that podcast.
So that's a pretty big pivot going from, games industry to like, what's that process been like, or what's your relationship now with the games industry stuff? Because that's, I don't know, to me, kind of a pretty big pivot.
Oh God, yeah. I'm laughing because so it's been really funny because like I've like I remember,
mean, you're not going into it for the money, let's be honest. Social work.
Yeah. Well, at least like the work is a little, I don't want to say it's more stable, but at least like it's reliable in the way that like there always needs to be social workers, whereas like jobs like that aren't kind of held victim to the kind of boom and bust model of the ways that game studios, like they need to employ gajillions of people for like the 6 to 12 months prior to a game's release, and then once it gets released they just like
that's what I was
lay
gonna
off
say
80% of the staff or something.
There's less while social work I imagine is incredibly difficult and demanding,
plenty of job security.
Well, and I imagine that there's it's like less abusive towards people
I don't
who
think
work
that's true,
in that
honestly.
I don't know. That's probably true. I just mean like that's probably the wrong way to put it, but I guess I'm just saying like that there's this whole mentality in the game space of like, I mean, if you don't want to work your butt off, and
right,
then like there's a million other people that want your job. So
right,
that's not the case in social work, I imagine.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's like, it's not
nobody wants
like,
that job.
and that's like, you saying that reminds me of certainly a thing that I experienced, and even my friends in other parts of journalism, like my friend Drew, I mentioned before, like a thing that was a constant pressure working at a place like Gawker or Vice is that your bosses and managers would, one, treat you like garbage, and then two, often pay you very poorly. Gawker actually paid people pretty well compared to industry standards, but Vice would hire people in entry level positions in its Brooklyn office that were making like $25,000 to $30,000 a year, which isn't a sustainable amount of money to live in New York City. New York City
Right.
is
Yeah.
incredibly expensive, and one of the ways that they would, like, one of the reasons why unionization at those companies was such a cool thing to witness and be part of was that whenever those criticisms would bubble up for so long, and these are exactly the same criticisms or things that would happen in game companies, is managers and bosses would be like, why are you complaining? Like, you work at Vice, like everyone thinks you're the
Mhm.
coolest person in the world. You get to go like
Yep.
hang out and smoke weed with rappers and call it work or something like that, and that's like,
Hmm.
I guess that's kind of true, but it's like it's really messed up when you trade in kind of cultural clout
Yep.
as an alternative to actual monetary
Being able to
compensation,
pay
Actual
your rent.
compensation.
Yeah.
Yep.
and that's the whole thing. I mean, that was one of the things that, like, this is a good story to tell, actually, that, like, I remember one of the things that was a real kind of wake up call to me at Blizzard that haunted me the entire time I worked there was I met this dude at a party, at a Blizzard party, who, and that, like, I should have the caveat that this is entirely his telling of the story, so it may be embellished or not entirely accurate. But he was working, one of the things you think of and hear about a lot in the game industry is that people, especially at a company like Blizzard, is you kind of get your foot in the door the way I did or the way other people do working in QA, quality assurance, where you're a game tester. And your sort of goal in that is you just want to get into the company, and then you want to find the right people and you want to start pitching them your ideas and showing them your creative capacity or your technical chops or something. So
Right.
Mhm.
for me, it was this thing of like, I met the narrative writers for StarCraft and Diablo and Heroes of the Storm, and I started kind of pitching them on stuff. And I eventually got to do a little bit of official narrative work on that. But for a lot of QA people, they're more interested in becoming designers proper. So this guy that I met at this party told me that he worked in QA on Diablo 3 for a very long time. And his goal, his goal for the entire time was he wanted to be one of the character designers. Characters like the heroes, like,
Mhm.
Barbarian, Witch Doctor,
Yeah.
whatever other
Mhm.
ones, I'm blanking on them right now. And he said that he kind of ingratiated himself with the design team on Diablo 3 to the point that he felt like he was literally like making kind of meaningful contributions to the game and like making kind of pivotal contributions to the ways that the heroes worked. And then finally there came a time where I think it was the lead designer for the Witch Doctor, but I might be misremembering that. Someone left the company, like someone in one of those very enviable design positions left the
Mhm.
company. And he was really excited because he's like, oh man, this is my big shot. This is like, I'm finally going to get to like ascend to the position of an official designer. And he said
Yeah.
he didn't get the job. And the only reason he didn't get the job was there was someone basically ahead of him in line that had been doing the same exact thing for slightly longer than him. And I was
Mm.
Uh-huh.
like, I remember when he told me that, I was like, wow, like, I was in my late 20s at the time, and I was like, I can't imagine committing all of my life and critical capacities to just the kind of like blind on some levels hope that I might get a shot to be one of the
Mhm.
people who gets into the kind of like,
Who gets to write a
upper,
character for a big franchise?
yeah, exactly.
You know? Yeah, it's like, I mean, no, it's just weird how much that means to so many people today.
Right.
That kind of thing. And I'm not downplaying or whatever, but I just It's when you think about it in the big scheme of things, it feels like a what's the word? Like a bait and switch almost.
It does feel like that, and I think one of the things that was genuinely very messed up about Blizzard, which I think is unique to Blizzard because of its history that I mentioned before, like Blizzard's been so successful and so singularly successful that it's been able to develop and kind of instill this very deep and profound kind of internal mythology and kind of hero worship of the people, like the sort of like OG level
Yeah.
designers who like created
Mhm.
WoW or created StarCraft, or like, you know, the guys who like first created what's kind of now considered the kind of modern Blizzard style of the like big shoulder pads and big heads and all that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And some of that is cool, and like it is genuinely cool. Sometimes it's also very upsetting to kind of meet your heroes and realize that they're not who you thought they were.
Yeah.
Um, but like there's a lot of internal pressure, and I think like it's similar to the one that I described in media at places like Vice, because and there's been stories of this, like Jason Schreier, who was a coworker of mine at Kotaku. I'm really grateful to him for writing this. He wrote a piece for Bloomberg recently about this, is that Blizzard is notorious, and I don't think people realize this outside the industry proper, is like they don't pay people well. They pay like well below industry standards a lot of the time. And one of the reasons they get away with doing that is because they sell people on this idea of like, yeah, you're going to get hired here and you're living in Orange County, which is one of the most expensive places in the world. And like, you know, God, I had so many coworkers who moved in with girlfriends and boyfriends they'd been dating for like 2 months just because they couldn't afford rent. And that always felt messed up to me. But it's like, yeah, you're making all these compromises, but you're working on Overwatch, and you might be able to one day be the person who designs the next Overwatch hero or something, you know? Anyways, to answer your question, Chris, about it, I think like I was laughing before because I was thinking of this really funny moment where, like, you know, I started this grad program, and one of the things that resonated with me a lot about social work, and some of this is kind of marketing fluff in its own way, but like, you know, the grad programs all kind of sell themselves on this idea of like, you're going to be fighting for social and racial and economic justice, and you're going to be like changing the world for the better and that kind of stuff, you know? So I remember during like orientation, especially when we were all kind of talking about like oppression and all this bad, scary stuff like that, in kind of more general terms, I talked a lot about Gamergate because I think like my experience with Gamergate was one of the big things that kind of led me to this realization of like, okay, like there are these kind of awful and scary forces in society, and I want to be working against them more actively, if that makes sense. And I remember like one of my classmates, a couple weeks after that, we were doing this kind of one-on-one project together, and I remember she just said to me, she was like, you know, like you always talk about video games and you make them sound so bad and scary, and like video games are supposed to be fun, like you should just be enjoying video games. And I was like,
you're just a salty dog, man. You've seen too much.
And I was like, oh man, I clearly have still struggled to communicate the true horror of something like Gamergate to people, if like she was in class with me this whole time, and what she came out of it thinking is like, man, Yannic's just like really down on video games. But I don't, it's been kind of bittersweet in a lot of ways leaving, and it's been even more bittersweet recently because I've been having I've had some financial troubles with my health problems, and that like made me like, I had to sell my PS4 Pro, which was kind of a surprisingly emotional process because I had a lot of games that I was still planning to play on it, and then some really good ones like Death Stranding or something that I wanted to replay at least once more before giving it away, or moving to the next generation of consoles or whatever. And like that, it's kind of twofold. Like one way it's nice because I think now that I don't have to think about games as work anymore, I can kind of just appreciate them singularly and solely, and that's honestly been a relief, because like to that classmate of mine, like to her point, like especially in the really dark moments of something like Gamergate, like I just felt like I was just starting to hate video games. Like I just like
Yeah.
literally
Sure.
thought that they were like this evil plague that had been brought upon society and they needed to be destroyed entirely, and we needed to kind of just like escape video games as a thing. And obviously nothing's that simple, and like I don't think anything is either like 100% good or 100% evil, but you know, when you can kind of like approach games on your own terms, like especially like I think about this a lot with a game like Death Stranding or any of these kind of big expansive open world games I've played since then. Like I remember playing Breath of the Wild for the first time, and that like
Oh boy. Yeah.
that's one of those games that's so gorgeous and like so amazing that I just found it like emotionally moving. Like at certain points I would like get to a new terrain in that game, like when you get to like the kind of like snowy hilltops in the first part, and I'm like, this is so beautiful, it like would almost bring me to tears sometimes. And it's like I'm a big
That game was the definition of like awe-inspiring to me.
yeah.
Like I remember that so vividly, of just feeling that feeling
Yeah.
multiple times.
Right, and I think so much of video games is literally this process of like you see a mountain in front of you, and then the whole process of playing the game is climbing that mountain. And like that's a very literal process in Breath of the Wild. You know, you get to the top of the mountain.
There's a lot of climbing, yes.
And then there's something totally new on top of the mountain, and it like becomes
Yeah,
it like opens the world in this whole new beautiful way. And like I remember playing that, and I played that game over the course of like many months. And like I think that was one of the games that really made me realize like if I had to play this game to review it, like I don't think I would have hated it, but I certainly wouldn't have enjoyed it or appreciated it like anywhere
Yeah.
near as much, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Um
I can totally
changes
get that.
things.
so that part's been really cool. The part that I say that's bittersweet though is that it's like I remember I was trying to think about this because like when I moved into my new apartment and then I sold my PS4, I was trying to think of games that I really wanted to play. And you know, currently like the games on my backlog that I actually can play with my current equipment are a couple different CRPGs, and like those games all sound really cool. Like I really want to play Disco Elysium. I've heard like amazing things about that, and I haven't gotten a chance
Oh,
to
yeah,
play
me
that
too.
yet. And
Yep.
there's one other one that I'm blanking on that I is kind of in a similar space to me. But like so I think part of the thing that's just bittersweet about it is kind of realizing that time equation again, because like
Yep.
I'm the kind of person who like whenever I do anything, I commit myself to it to a pretty great extent. So
I have that same struggle.
transitioning from having video games be my livelihood, and then because they were my livelihood, I don't even know if this was the best approach, but I like used that to kind of justify to myself just
The
buying
investment.
every single video
Yeah.
game and playing every
Mhm.
single video game as much as I could. And now it's like I just didn't play anything for the 3 months that I was in school. Like I remember a week or two before school started, I like found when I was moving this like old like PlayStation Store credit like, you know, code in one of my boxes of random junk, and I used that to buy that game Days Gone. Have you guys played that? The
Oh,
like
yeah. No, I
open
haven't, but I
world
know what you're talking about. Yeah.
biker zombie game.
Mhm.
And
Oh, yes, I have played that. Sorry, I was thinking about. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
that's
Sorry, go
another
ahead.
one actually that I think, going to the point again, like I think that's exactly the kind of game that got kind of shredded, or maybe not that strongly, but like reviews really didn't like that game. And I think a lot of the reviews, like reading those reviews, I could tell that it's like this is clearly written by someone who had to play this in 2 days and was very frustrated by it. Whereas like I think if you were allowed to take your
Yeah.
time with that game and do all the
Yeah.
side quests and stuff, it's not like the best. It's certainly not a Breath of the Wild level game, but it's like it has a real heart to it that I really
That's cool.
respected, and I think a lot of people who reviewed it kind of missed that in one way or another. But that was literally like I played that, and then I played like a couple games of HOTS and Overwatch every so often during the semester on like nights when I was just kind of blowing off steam with my friends. But other than that, like I haven't played any games really until winter break started, and then I started replaying Fallout 1 and Planescape Torment, which are two games that I've been planning to replay for a very long time. But
Yeah, wow.
That's the part that feels bittersweet to me, where it's like, well, there's clearly all this amazing stuff out there, and it's not like me leaving didn't stop the game industry. Like the game industry is still chugging along, doing its thing, and like sometimes when I see this stuff, like seeing the cyberpunk stuff, like I'm like so put off by like the sheer aesthetic and everything of cyberpunk, let alone all of the controversies related to it, that like I've seen and I've talked to a couple of my friends who are still in games media about that, and I'm like, God, if my full-time job today was like having to like, you know, lurk around the internet to find posts to write about cyberpunk, like I would be miserable, because like that just doesn't sound fun to me at all, and like that game just is so off-putting to me. But the kind of flip side of that is like, well, I don't want to like not play. I don't want to like miss games entirely, and I think that's kind of like I think that's just a problem we all have to figure out as adults, is like, how do we find time to game while having like our lives and our families.
We need to kind of wrap this up because we've been talking for a long time and
we've
gone over. No, you're good. It was really interesting hearing your story because we haven't gotten to talk on this level in a while. Yeah, I can sympathize with that because like video games are awesome. They're so, and I think like you probably feel this more than me, but I feel in some ways like in the 2000s, late 2000s, you know, there's this whole new games journalism thing that Kill Screen was a big part of. And like, I feel like that's when I started writing about video games seriously. And I think there was this feeling like we critics and stuff are making a big contribution to the world of games, and games are so cool and powerful and they have so much potential, and then life hits and you realize how unsustainable like participating at that level is. And I mean, I miss it. Like I'm not able to invest. Like I'm lucky to play like 4 or 5 hours. That's a really good week for me sometimes with how much I'm juggling. And
4 or 5
you just
hours,
come
like
to
a week or a month?
Yeah, like a week sometimes of I mean, that's nothing in the world of video games. Like that's
noob level, dude.
Right.
How much time I put in?
It'll take you like half a year. Half a year to finish The Witcher.
Yeah. And so, I mean, that's just how it feels lately. I don't know if that's accurate, but all that to say, like, you just kind of have to come to terms with that balance, I guess. But I do miss it, and I do miss like the times when I felt like I had the margin to like participate in this super cool new medium that's changing and growing and like and making a critical contribution to it with my articles and stuff. But
there are, I mean, I don't know, like I legitimately don't know on any level if like I know some of my articles pissed the right people off, because like I know, you know, I have a couple friends who none of them actually work at Riot anymore, but I remember like I met a couple of them through writing about League all the time, and I know that I was definitely a kind of like figure at that company at a certain point where like people up to the level of like Mark Merrill and the founders of the company were like, oh God, like this asshole Yannic is gonna like call us out on this shit and we need to be careful about it. But
that's awesome.
like that's kind of, you know, that's on one level that's like what you kind of aspire to be able to do as a journalist, is have an actual impact on anything. And like, you know, like I remember like writing a couple things about like Far Cry, for instance, which is a series that I've always been a fan of, but definitely had tons of problems with. And I remember like
same.
talking to a good friend of mine in the industry who worked on one of the Far Cry games, and he told me, which might have just been gassing me up, but he said that like he did things a certain way in approaching his own work that was like trying to think of criticisms that I and other people had made about the previous Far Cry games. And that is really cool to think about. And I think like
Yeah.
I think there's like another way that you think of both like journalists in the kind of old school text-based way and then kind of vloggers and streamers and stuff where it's like they're genuinely kind of like they're the ones that are giving these games life at this point. Like, you know, something like Cyberpunk or a game like that or Skyrim or anything wouldn't exist the way that it does without the kind of memes associated with it and stuff, you know?
Yeah.
Or like I remember like Mario Kart 8, which was that was the first I was assigned Mario Kart 8 as my first kind of test run when Steven at Kotaku kind of put us all on these like online games. And I remember that was really funny because then I remember at one point when Gamergate first started, he did this interview kind of defending Kotaku and trying to defend games journalism to Total Biscuit, the YouTuber who sadly passed away a couple years ago. But I remember he said at one point in that interview, he was like, if you want to look at like really like pioneering games journalism, you should go look at Yannic Lejac's articles about Mario Kart. And I was like,
That's
like,
great.
This is hilarious. This is like my biggest kind of claim to fame at this point is writing about Mario Kart. Like, I'm an adult, you know.
That's funny.
You go into journalism thinking you're going to be like Woodward and Bernstein, and then you write a couple, you know, hard-hitting pieces about Mario Kart instead.
That's funny.
Hey, whatever it takes.
That's great.
But no, to that time point, and then I promise I'll shut up soon, but it's weird because I think people overstate the time commitment of games sometimes, because like I remember there's something I got in an argument with actually way back in the Kill Screen days with Jamin, because Jamin's one of those people who would always say stuff like, well, you know, Dark Souls takes like 300 hours to complete, and you could read like the entire collected works of Leo Tolstoy in that same time period. And I was like, well, yes, like I guess that's kind of a slight on the fact that it's like you're sinking time that you could be doing something quote unquote better or more valuable in. But you know, the comparison itself is also revealing like being a person who's really into reading literature, especially difficult philosophically and textually dense literature like Russian literature, like that's a time commitment too. Like all these things are like you kind of have to make trade-offs as a person in terms of like
for sure.
how much content do I want to consume. The one way that I've found it even kind of, I don't want to say like heartbreaking because that's pretty hyperbolic, but like the way that it's made me the most sad is with the online multiplayer games like MOBAs, because in addition to that kind of uphill climb that I described at first, the thing that makes those games so demanding and I think makes them kind of inaccessible for many adults, like anyone other than teenagers or college students who have tons of free time on their hands, is that to just keep up with the sheer amount of changes and balance updates and like tweaks to characters and stuff, you have to be playing those games on like a weekly basis or a monthly basis at the very least. And you know, every time I would try to log back into League or Heroes of the Storm after taking like a couple months off, it was so painful trying to like reacclimate myself, because it's like suddenly everything works completely differently. And that's the part that's been really a bummer to me, because like there is all the toxicity and stuff, but I think like the thing that's unique even to video games to me about team-based multiplayer games is like, you know, games are ultimately power fantasies a lot of the time, or empowerment fantasies. And I think team-based games are really powerful to me because it's not just you individually having that power fantasy of like, oh, I'm leveling up and becoming big and powerful and now I can defeat the big monster. It's literally like you're working with a group of like 3 to 4 other people.
Yeah.
And in working with them, you're able to kind of accomplish these really exciting and dramatic feats that you would never be able to do on your own. And that's really, really cool to me. And that's like that's one of the things I miss the most about playing MOBAs regularly. Is like you don't have those kind of dramatic sort of sports like moments if you're not really deeply invested in them.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Chris had one of those last night playing Rocket League.
Yeah.
Oh man, yeah. Rocket League.
Yeah.
No, this is great, Yannic. Thanks so much for your time, man. And yeah, you mentioned you have a GoFundMe page. Did you want to mention that real quick?
Oh yeah, thank you for reminding me. I guess like that would be if I feel like a lot of podcasts I listen to end with people asking to plug something, and the one thing I would plug is I don't know if you can just I'll send you the link if you could put it in the notes
absolutely.
of the show, but
Yeah, sure.
Help Yannic survive his crushing medical expenses. God, GoFundMe is such a just dark
Aptly
corner
named.
of our current healthcare system. But yeah, I've been kind of put in this financial sinkhole, which certainly isn't like the reason I'm coming on podcasts like this or something to try to promote my GoFundMe, but it is something I try to just kind of plug as much as possible if I can, because this stuff isn't cheap, sadly.
Yep. For sure. Yeah, you've been through the ringer, man, and would definitely encourage people. If you're listening to this, go help Yannic out. Totally would wholeheartedly encourage you to do that.
And people can follow you on Twitter too, right?
Yeah, my Twitter is just my name, like at Yannic Lejac, YANNICK LEJACQ. And I haven't been writing publicly a lot lately, but like it's something that I definitely want to do more of, both like in a personal sense. Like one of my big plans this summer, once I finish the first year, is I'm going to finally make my own website. And then, I don't know, depending on how stuff goes, I may want to try to do some sort of Substack or Patreon or something. But I do write occasionally. And when I'm not like writing full articles, I'm, writing all those amazing high quality tweets I'm known for. So definitely watch that space as well.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Yeah, well, this was great, Yannic. Really appreciate it, man. And
look forward to you live tweeting your hernia surgery next week. I'll be right there
so
with
much.
you, buddy.
And Chris, good luck to you as well.
You too, man.
This was a ton of fun, and I really enjoyed talking to you guys.